Welcome to the Tabletop Gaming Guild. I am Nathan Wilson, and today I will be beginning my series of reviews on GMT games. Now, if you're not familiar with GMT games, they are one of the best-known companies among the wargaming community. You might say, oh, this is Tabletop Gaming Guild. We mostly talk about Euros and Ameritrash. We don't talk about wargaming too much. No, for many people, wargaming is almost a separate hobby. However, GMT Games is a company that has made major inroads into bridging the gap between the two communities. Whether it's by taking what they've learned from wargaming and applying it to a Euro theme, or by taking a war theme and demystifying the rules and making them more approachable for new players. Today, I'll be starting my reviews with Dominant Species. Dominant Species is one of the simplest complex games you'll ever play. In Dominant Species, you'll be playing as one of 6 animal types, whether it's mammals, reptiles, birds, amphibians, arachnids, or insects. You will be trying to thrive and survive. You will be dominating a habitat, spreading to new habitats, and growing your population. Why do I call this a simple, complex game? Well, it's simple to teach, yet it's one of the meatiest Euros you'll ever play. Dominant Species is broken down into 3 phases. First, you have your worker placement, where you'll be selecting actions to take in the future. Then you have your action phase, where you'll be actually taking those actions. And finally, you have your reset phase, which will be evaluating the board, causing extinction, and scoring points. So what makes this game so easy to teach? Well, you simply have to teach one major concept, that being the difference between dominance and majority, and then you can use your handy player board to go through each potential action. So, what is the difference between dominance and majority? To start off with, the insects are adapted to use grass as 2 sources of food. So the wetlands has 2 grass next to it, so you multiply insects having 2 and 2 on the board, so you have 4 sources of food. If you compare that to other species, you'll notice insects have the most potential sources of food, and so they're therefore dominant. If you want to look at majority, that's pretty simple. Insects have more species on that habitat than any other species, so therefore they have majority. During the worker placement section, you will be simply taking turns, placing an action pawn. Once every player has placed all their action pawns, you would then go down the track and resolve each possible action. Initiative, pretty straightforward. You move your species up 1 on the initiative track, and you get to place your action pawn on another available spot. In Adaptation, you will be simply taking a resource type and adding it to your player board so you are adapted to use that as a food source. Regression is a function that will happen regardless of whether there's an action pawn placed in the space. On the first turn, you're safe, but in future turns, each unique resource type here indicates a resource that every player will lose. Placing an action pawn here protects one of your resource types. Abundance allows you to take one of these food types and add it to the board, potentially changing dominance in a region. Wasteland, again, doesn't happen the first turn. In future turns, if nobody's taken an action pawn and put it on the location to remove one of these, any remaining food types will disappear if they are adjacent to tundra. Depletion, again, this won't happen the first or even the second turn. They will eventually have tokens moving down, and a person can take your action pawn and place it on depletion to take one of these tokens off and choose the place on the board where they see that type and remove that one of those tokens. Glaciation is one of the strongest take that element. When you perform Glaciation, you would place a piece of tundra adjacent to another piece of tundra and take all the tokens that were on there and only return one of each animal type. Any other remaining species go back to the player's supply. You also get bonus points based on this handy chart. If you place your tundra next to one other tundra, you get 1 point, next to 2 other tundras, 3, and so forth. Speciation. You simply look at the food type you've chosen, find a matching one on the board, and you get to place down new species according to this handy chart. So if I were to choose this food source, I would get to place down 2 species here on the desert, 2 on the mountain, and 1 on the tundra. Wanderlust allows you to select one of these 3 terrains, add it to the board, and take one of these food types and add it to that terrain. Then in food chain order, each player gets to migrate in adjacent species if they wish. And you also get bonus points based on how many tiles you place this adjacent to. So migration allows you to move species. And each location on this placement board tells you how many you can move. Amphibians here could move up to 7 species. For each move, you would take 1 species from the board and move it to an adjacent tile. Competition just allows you to take out a single species from 3 different locations. So I could take 1 from the desert, 1 from wetlands, which there's none in the wetlands. This is no longer considered wetlands. I could also take 1 from a tundra, but I have to have a species present at that location. Domination mostly allows you to score points as well as potentially take a dominance card. So by taking dominance, you would put your action pawn that was in the location and select the location you want to score. And scoring is based on majority. So whoever has the most gets a certain number of points. Whoever has second has a certain amount of points, and third, and so forth. There's a nice little chart here. This is where dominance is important, because whoever has this domination marker gets to take one of these dominance cards, so it gives you nice little cool powers. So that's the action phase. Final phase is simply the reset phase where you would determine extinction. Extinction occurs if your species is no longer adapted to eat any of the food that's at that location. Once that happens, you can no longer be dominant, and at the end of the phase, all remaining species go extinct. Then you would determine survival. Survival is determined by looking at tundra spaces. Whoever has the most species on tundra gets this card that scores a lot of potential points. And now you would reseed the board. Resource tokens at the bottom of a track would slide off. Following the arrows, resource tokens would slide down, and the top row would be replenished. You would also replenish any dominance cards that were taken. The game ends when you reach the bottom of this deck and somebody takes the Ice Age Domination card. Once the game ends, you will score each habitat one more time, and that's the game. I did leave out one small aspect, which is player powers. They're pretty straightforward. As shown on the board, the reptiles get a free regression action each round. The insects get to place 1 extra species during the speciation. The birds get to move 2 spaces instead of 1 when migrating. The arachnids get to kill 1 extra species during competition. The mammals can avoid extinction with 1 species. And the amphibians start with 1 extra resource adaptation. So what do I think about dominant species? Well, this is an incredibly well-designed game. It's solid. Everything you need to know is on this player board. Yeah, it's a fair amount of text, but the way the game flows, you simply have to know one little tiny section of this board at a time. Like any complex game, new players are not going to beat an experienced player. Some people have argued that these domination cards add randomness and luck, and yes, while they are powerful, there's no hidden information there. At the beginning of the round, they're all out, and they're all very powerful. If you don't get something you want, it's because you didn't take the appropriate actions to get that card. It's not because you didn't know it was there. So in short, if you want a complex game you can really sink your teeth in, this is that game.